Hold on, if you guys would go ahead and mute yourselves, that would be helpful. Thank you. So we have that James Baldwin was a prolific American novelist, playwright, essayist, poet, and activist. He was born on August 2nd, 1924 in Harlem, New York. He was one of the 20th century's greatest writers, and he broke new literary ground with the exploration of racial and social justice issues in his many works. He was especially known for his essays on the Black experience in America. In 1979, James Baldwin wrote to his literary agent to describe his upcoming project, Remember This House. This novel gave a personal account of the three lives of his close friends, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. However, he was unable to complete his novel and left 30 pages of his manuscript, which took Raoul Peck 10 years to complete, into a film based on the manuscripts. That film is I Am Not Your Negro. The clip that will follow displays James Baldwin debating against William F. Buckley at Cambridge University, whether or not the American dream is at the expense of the American Negro. And so let's have a look at the clip.
What is relevant about this is that whereas 40 years ago when I was born, the question of having to deal with what is unspoken by the subjugated, what is never said to the master, of having to deal with this reality was a very remote possibility. It was in no one's mind. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree. If you walk out of Harlem, ride out of Harlem, downtown, the world agrees. What you see is much bigger, cleaner, whiter, richer, safer than where you are. They collect the garbage. People obviously can pay their life insurance. The children look happy, safe. You're not. And you go back home. And it would seem then, of course, that it's an act of God, that this is true, that you belong where white people have put you. It is only since the Second World War that there's been a counter image in the world. And that image not come about through any legislation on the part of any American government, but through the fact that Africa was suddenly on the stage of the world, and Africans had to be dealt with in a way they'd never been dealt with before. This gave an American Negro for the first time a sense of himself beyond a savage or a clown. It has created, and will create, a great many conundrums. One of the great things that the white world does not know, but I think I do know, is that black people are just like everybody else. One has used the myth of Negro and the myth of color to pretend and to assume that you are dealing essentially with something exotic, bizarre, and practically, according to human laws, unknown. Alas, it is not true. We are also mercenaries, dictators, murderers, liars. We are human too. What is crucial here is that unless we can manage to establish some kind of dialogue between those people whom I pretend has paid for the American dream, and those other people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. I want to say at the end, at the last, is that that is what concerns me most. We are sitting in this room, and we are all, at least we like to think we are, relatively civilized, and we can talk to each other at least on certain levels, so that we could walk out of here assuming that the measure of our enlightenment, or at least our politeness, has some effect on the world. It may not. I remember, for example, when the ex-Attorney General, Mr. Robert Kennedy, said that it was conceivable that in 40 years in America we might have a Negro president. And that sounded like a very emancipated statement, I suppose, to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday. And now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president. What is dangerous here is the turning away from anything any white American says. The reason for the political hesitation in spite of the Johnson landslide is the one who's been betrayed by American politicians for so long. And I'm a grown man, and perhaps I can be reasoned with. I certainly hope I can be. But I don't know, and neither does Martin Luther King, none of us know how to deal with those other people whom the white world has so long ignored, who don't believe anything the white world says and don't entirely believe anything I or Martin say. And one can't blame them. You watch what has happened to them in less than 20 years. It seems to me that the city of New York, for example, this is my last point, which had Negroes in it for a very long time. If the city of New York were able, as it has indeed been able, in the last 15 years to reconstruct itself, tear down buildings and raise great new ones, downtown and for money, and has done nothing whatever except build housing projects in the ghetto for the Negroes. And of course the Negroes hate it. Presently the property does indeed deteriorate because the children cannot bear it. They want to get out of the ghetto. If the American pretensions were based on more solid, a more honest assessment of life and of themselves, it would not mean for Negroes, when someone says urban renewal, that Negroes simply are going to be thrown out into the streets, which is what it does mean now. This is not an act of God. We're dealing with a society made and ruled by men. If the American Negro had not been present in America, I am convinced that the history of the American labor movement would be much more edifying than it is. It is a terrible thing.
Staying connected to your audience has never been more essential. That's why we've designed boxes
for an entire people to surrender to the notion that 1/9 of its population is beneath them. And until that moment, until the moment comes when we, the American people, are able to accept the fact that I have to accept, for example, that my ancestors are both white and black, that on that continent we are trying to forge a new identity for which we need each other, and that I am not a ward of America. I am not an object of missionary charity. I am one of the people who built the country. Until this moment, there is scarcely any hope for the American dream, because the people who are denied participation in it, by their very presence, will wreck it. And if that happens, it's a very grave moment for the West. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So now we'll be moving into our next section, which will be the questions. We have a couple of rules that we want to lay out first. So the questions will be addressed to the panelists first, and if we have enough time, we will ask one audience member each question. And if we have time at the end, we'll open it up to the audience to comment or ask questions to the panelists if they choose to. So our first question is, what was your immediate reaction to the film?
Okay, so I can go for that one. So my immediate reaction was a sense of enlightenment. I believe the whole film, it was very, very educating. There were many facts that were stated that I hadn't known, and many clips that I hadn't seen before. A lot of things were very graphic, and a lot of times I think that's very important for us to see, as it's our history. And I think one of the key things that he said, I think that'll stick with me for sure. He was saying that history is not the past, but that history is right now, it's the present, and it's what we carry with us at all times. But it, you know, we have to remember our past. So definitely a sense of enlightenment. It was very educating.
Just to add on to what Joshua said, I think it was very enlightening, and also it made me angry in a sense, that I knew that this happened, but that it still happens today, and how I could still relate, even though it's an evolution of what happened in the past, it's still the same. It kind of resonates with what we have to live with today. And so I think it just goes back to what James Baldwin said, that Black history is American history. And we have to understand that in order to move into a better life as Americans.
Well, when I saw the documentary, it gave me a sense of hope to see all the things that we've been through in the past, but even though it's not over, we can still do something to change it and to change our future for the better of everyone else.
All right, as the older member, I appreciate the hope of the young people, because I needed it. I told some people before I was even assigned to the panel that I didn't know if I wanted to watch that, because when I watch documentaries or movies or what have you like that, understand I've seen them quite a bit. I'll turn 60 in June. So since the 8th grade in high school, when I saw Birth of a Nation, I've seen a lot of films of this nature. And my first reflection on it was, unfortunately, I didn't look at it as history. I looked at it as a loop of what's been going on since I've been alive in this country. And so that's the frustrating part about it, that you could close your eyes and watch the film and not have any idea when it was made, and whether you were here 40 years ago, 20 years ago, you could think it was current. And for me, it was just, it's not history, but it's like a present history that's continuing. And to me, that's problematic.
Would anyone from the audience like to participate in this question?
If you'd like to participate, there should be a reactions button at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand, or you can raise your hand in the chat.
Okay, I'd like to say one thing about that was that historically, even in school, when they did start teaching some type of Black history, a a lot of times our parents did not talk about it. And so what we learned, you know, at school. And so of course it was very limited. Here's the other piece that this made me think about was that you would have thought that Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X, you would have thought that at least Malcolm X and Martin Luther King never came together, but they did. And because you know, when being taught this in school, they left it like they were at two completely different ends of the spectrum. When in actuality, just like James Baldwin said, about the end of their lives, they basically were fighting the same battle. So I was happy to see that.
Thank you, Pastor Tina. Kristen?
Yeah, so the next question is about the theme of willful American innocence, that introduces the two parallels of the American dream, which is oppression or hatred, and innocence and ignorance, and how this is relevant in modern times.
Pastor Bonner had his hand raised, Kristen, before you went to the next question.
We're going to take one person per question so that we have time for more questions. Thank you.
Lena, what do you think about the theme of willful innocence?
Well, I think that it expresses what we're going through today. It expresses how we think, how we act, and what we can do to improve. And that's why I think it's these times aren't as different as the times back then, but we have improved a bit.
Dwayne, did you want to add something?
Yeah, when I think of willful innocence, it's almost for those who turn a blind eye to allow things to continue, even if you're not directly responsible, quote unquote, but you're willing for it to continue because it has no bearing on you or your life. And it's just a daily occurrence that is outside of your bubble. So you allow it to continue willfully. But you're not really innocent behind it. It's almost like willful guilt to me, by not speaking out or saying something that you know is not right, but it's been going on for so long, so you're just going along with the ride.
Kristen, did you want? Oh, I see Joshua has something there. I see you.
Yes. So Dwayne, I will piggyback off of what you said. I think you made me realize. So when I was watching the movie, I remember he was saying that ignorance, and the question is about willful innocence, but he was saying that ignorance is, as well as segregation, is having a wall set up, and then you're on one side, and the other culture is on the other, and you are you don't even care about learning or interacting with the other side of the wall, but it's willful, like you're perfectly fine with it. That's how you would like it. And innocence, I just thought that related really well. So Dwayne, you brought that out of me. But when I was doing the research, the term loss of innocence. So the loss of innocence means, it means experiencing or period in a person's life that leads to a greater awareness of evil, pain, or suffering in the world around them. And then the westernized view of this is of childhood, and the loss of innocence is simply a social construction. And so I think when I thought of innocence, James Baldwin made a really good comparison of Doris Day on one end of the spectrum, and he made a comparison of Ray Charles on the other end. And so when I did my research on Doris Day, because I remember from the movie Grease, they said her name in a song, and I remembered it very well because I was like, who is that? And so she was in the 60s, like a really like huge symbol for like G Love and, well, I mean rated G Love, rated G Love and just innocence and bliss, the smile and everything. And so I looked back, and in that time, as well as Doris Day, was Marilyn Monroe, basically her counterpart. And so if anything, I think because Marilyn Monroe was known for, you know, not the greatest things, and she was obviously a symbol for a different thing. But Marilyn Monroe being so far on the other end of the spectrum of good, because she was not good, her symbol, I feel like it amplified Doris Day's innocence to a totally different level of innocence, because you have two completely different women, you know, in the same time period. So willful innocence, I thought that tied in really well.
And to add on to the two parallels, I thought about what James Baldwin was depicting in his words of how you have the white women that are dancing and having a good time versus Black men and women being lynched from trees. So there's these two realities that Americans are facing, and they're not being confronted, adding on to what Joshua was saying with the segregation. Once you have segregation, you put up this wall because you don't care if I know you, and we don't care if we know you. So I think that just all goes back to willful innocence or American innocence, where we choose not to look at those two parallels. We choose to think about dancing and having a good time, even though our fellow brothers are being lynched and killed. And Pastor Bonner, I think, wanted to add on to the subject as well.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this. I was going to ask something to Dwayne, but I'm just going to raise a question. So we're talking in a sense about privilege, the ability not to be involved in a social condition because it doesn't apply to you. So that's what I'm hearing, and I'll leave it at that.
I think that privilege also is relevant today. During the summer with Black Lives Matter, even though others were out in the streets protesting and calling out police brutality, you have others on social media posting, you know, beach pictures and other stuff, because they don't have to worry about what we have to go through on a daily basis, because it's not their reality. But the next question that we have is, when history is portrayed, it is usually shown in Black and white color to depict that this time period occurred a long time ago, when it was less than a century ago. So what do you think of the director's choice to utilize color images?
First, I thought that by bringing color into the images, you're giving the audience a sense of modern day media, because even though it wasn't that long ago, how can I say this? Even though it wasn't that long ago, you're giving people a taste of what it would look like, what it would be. Because you know how some people imagine things back in the day are black and white when everything was in color. And it gives, each picture tells a story, and the color brings life into that picture. Even if it's black and white, it tells a story. And you know the saying, a picture is 1,000 words, or the value is 1,000 words. So by using color and bringing life into that image, I think that was a smart choice.
Yeah, I think that was done cleverly, directing towards, younger America, because usually if they see something in black and white, even we're guilty of it, you know, the older adults, you look at it, you immediately think outdated, not relevant. I'm not going to take it too seriously, but by bringing it in color, just grabs their attention more because that's what they're used to. So that was smart for him to do that, to make sure that the relevancy would not get lost in the black and white that you would see on it back in the day. So that was a good point that he did.
I think to add on to that point, James Baldwin also mentioned in the documentary about America trying to preserve their purity. And so we use these black and white pictures to kind of preserve that that white Americans are innocent of the crimes they've committed against minorities in this country. And so the black and white pictures are there to preserve their purity and make it seem as though they didn't cause this problem and that it happened a long time ago, to make the European counterparts look at them a different way, even though the whole world sees how they treat minorities on a daily basis. And I think Ms. Johnson wanted to add on to this subject. We can't hear you.
It's Armisha,
You're
you're on mute.
Armisha.
In looking at the movie, just to quote some of what James Baldwin said, that nothing can be changed until it's faced. And we are our own history, and that it's not a white world, and it never was, that it's just a metaphor for power. And it's up to the American people to decide who and what we are. So I think this is something that resonated with me, because nobody can tell you who or what you are. You have to be your own person and know and be the change that we know is right. And just to and all just trust ourselves and what's going on. Just trust that process.
Our next question is, what were your thoughts on the pop culture or propaganda shown in this film?
Lena, you want to start with that one?
Yes. Someone can go before me.
I'll go ahead. So that was the pop culture and propaganda. So I think when it was, I know it was like a montage of well, not even a montage, because he showed it over and over again, all the different shows and the art forms, music, everything. But a lot of the things that stood out to me was when they had Black people maybe in a movie, and they were doing something repeatedly, like their eyes were open very, very, very wide, or they were speaking, they were literally stuttering when they were speaking, like they couldn't speak. Or when they were showing all of the commercials for whatever product or service, and they had Black people as mammies, as servants, etc. It was just, I think it was ridiculous how openly degrading and demeaning they were being. It was just, I don't know. It was eye-opening. I think the answer is that it was eye-opening.
I think it also showed how relevant it is today. Like even with the Aunt Jemima company, like that's now just being resolved. Even though that was a really big company that was sold for some years, it's now just being removed. And even like with the Gator Baby and blackface for entertainment, I think it just really shows how much it resonates today. Even though we don't see it in the entertainment industry as much as it was shown in the documentary, it's still there and it still happens today.
Yeah, it was interesting to see that back in the early 60s that here you have a Black man being highlighted on a well-known talk show. So he was on the Dick Cavett show. So it kind of goes back to early slavery where white people were comfortable with Black people in certain roles. And one of the roles they've always been comfortable of Black people in is entertainment, some form of entertainment. That was a talk show. They're okay with that. Black people in the movies, they're okay with that. Singing or dancing, entertainment, they're okay with that. So, you know, it's been going that way for a long time. It's been that way for a long time. So it's interesting to see that here we have James Baldwin, who's a Black author, and here he is on the Dick Cavett show, a well-known show back, you know, in the early 60s. So a lot about that speaks a lot about the comfortableness of where Black people fall and where white people are comfortable with seeing them or how they see them.
I don't see a hand, Kristen, but I do have a question about this. And I was going to ask you, where do you think that the propaganda that we see today, how do you think it relates? How do you think it's different or not?
I think it's evolved in a sense where it's now in the media, or we're not seen as, I mean, we are, but we're mostly seen as criminals in the news. So statistically speaking, over half of white offenders are convicted in America versus minorities, which is 20%, even though 90% of the time we're depicted in the media as criminals and lazy and being in gangs, and that's all we do. And I think that's just an evolution of what we saw in the documentary. And I was going to add on to what Mr. Dwayne was saying about the entertainment business or industry. I think it's also a problem that we see with women of color, Black women especially, in terms of colorism, where the only representation that we get of Black women are light-skinned women with loose curls. And we don't see enough of Lupita or other dark-skinned actresses. So I think that's another result of past entertainment industries and representation as well.
I do see a hand here. Pastor Jeanette, you wanted to add something?
Thank you. This is Pastor Michael Jeanette. I think part of the propaganda now through social media, stories are created. And specifically Aunt Jemima, when this came up with conversation with some family members, you know, the thing I heard was, well, she wanted to be, you know, she wanted, everything was good for Aunt Jemima, and stories were created to say, so not only is it promulgated and passed on, but it's like, no, this is what they wanted. They want this image to be propelled. Like, why would they take that away from her? That was part of her livelihood, and came up with this story to try to establish it. And so that's part of that privilege that we talk about, and the willful innocence and ignorance is like, not only do we pass it on as, you know, as white people, but then we tell a story to say, no, this is actually good. And that's unfortunately part of what we're facing, and trying to unpack that. And I think part of that is a lot of listening, and we need to do more listening, and we need to do more work as white people to stop those stories and to stop that, stop those untruths. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for that. So our next question will be, what did you think about Baldwin's relationship with Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, as they all represented different views of the Black community in America? I think I want Mr. Dwayne to answer this question. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I thought the relationship to all three were important to him. Um, it was interesting how he highlighted in the film when he met or didn't meet, he was speaking, and he noticed that Malcolm was in the room and taking pictures or filming him at the time. And I think he was a little bit intimidated by Malcolm being there. But I think he held all to high esteem, and I think he understood that there were differences in the approach of what they wanted to do for Black people and the manner in which they wanted to do it. But I think he felt that all three were integral as far as progressing for Black Americans. But he did understand the differences that they had, well, especially Malcolm and Dr. King in the beginning anyway. But yeah, he was in awe a little bit of Malcolm, I thought, but held all of them to high esteem.
Pastor Beverly wanted to add something.
Yes, in regards to the three men, I think he held them all in esteem, but I think he also he felt like they were indications that Black people are not monoliths. We don't all think the same way. The goal is the same, but we think differently. And I thought that was very, very, a very, very pertinent statement that he made, because it seems that the world thinks that we all think the same, and we have one leader who tells us what to do, and we do what that one person says. But we have different opinions. We want the same thing. We have different opinions, and I think that the presentation of those three great men showed that we are different. We're different.
Pastor Tina.
I just wanted to highlight how James Balwin was amazing at bringing those three different people together and tying that up. But I want to say what stuck out to me is that he never joined the NAACP. He never worshiped in a church, and he, of course, was not anti-white. And that's why he didn't join the Black Panthers or anybody else, because, and I thought it was really interesting, the comment that he made about the church. He said that he felt that he could not be a part of it because they didn't do what they were commanded to do. They didn't follow the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And what else did he said? The commandment, love one another as I have loved you, is what he said. And so I thought that was very, very interesting. But I think it also kept him open so that he wasn't locked into a box by being in any of these. And then I thought the other important thing about that was the NAACP. I did not realize, and this was a learning point for me, I did not realize that they had issues with, shades and classism. And so, that was a piece, a brand new piece for me.
That was a really good point, Pastor Tina, that you made. I was actually about to make the same point. But to add on, I was just gonna say, I think it also showed how, even though those three were completely different in the ways they wanted to approach Black issues, in a sense, when he says at the beginning, as he's introducing these three men, he says that they all three fought for the Black cause only to be betrayed by his own people. And I thought that was really deep, how those men sacrificed their lives for the Black issue only to be betrayed by their own kind. And I think we also need to work on that today. I think that's a relevant issue that we have to address as a community in order to move forward as well. Okay, our next question is, how do you believe the killing of these three prominent figures affected James Baldwin and the Black community?
I believe that, well, James Baldwin and the Black community, they were heavily affected because seeing these three as very, well, they were the ones they looked to, you know, with Martin Luther King and his peace statements, Malcolm X and his, you know, peace, not just peace and violence. And as someone said early, they're on different sides of the spectrum. I think it was Pastor Tina. And then at the end, they came together. They were all, and somebody also said they were all they had the same goal. And so it just pushed people to do more, and not just rely on someone else to do it, but to take it into their own hands and fight for what they stand for and what they believe in, which was equality.
I think to add on to what Ina was saying, I remember in the clip when Martin Luther King Jr. had just been assassinated, and he said at his funeral that he was afraid to weep because he was afraid that he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't be able to stop weeping. I think, and that's what a lot of the Black community had to deal with, is that they had these three prominent leader figures, and now they don't know what to do. They don't know who to go to or how to approach the Black issue anymore, because I feel like once they killed those three prominent figures, they in a sense killed Black people's hope at that time, that change would happen. I think there was a clip after Martin Luther King's death that there was a riot after, I think, and that just really showed the Black people's feelings toward the government and what happened to those leaders. It kind of boiled over, and everyone lost the philosophy of talking or any principle they held at first, and they just wanted to hurt those people like they hurt them.
Yeah, I think it made him realize, and I think he even mentioned something towards the fact that it's going to be up to the conscience of white America, ultimately. And he tried not to separate it before America is where it should be. It's up to the consciousness of white America to come to grips with their morality. And he said at one point, I think he used the term monster morality. So it's almost as if until that moment comes when white America faces, discusses, and comes to some type of agreement on the right and wrongs of what has happened then, now, and going forward, then the country will never be healed. It doesn't matter how much we do, how many leaders come and go, and how many are assassinated, until they get to that point where they realize the ball's kind of consciously in their court, then there's always going to be a ceiling as far as the progression of race relations in the country.
I would like to hear from someone in the audience. Mr. Light, do you happen to have a thought about this question?
Again, state the question for me, please.
We're talking about, you know, what happened to our community when we lost these three prominent heroes. You were an adult at that time, right? Most of us only read about it in books.
Yes, we were part of much of what has transpired, being 88 years of last January. Those were horrific images to confront. And in fact, we were living in St. Louis then. And when the news broke, I sat there as a father of my 5 girls and cried. And they raised the question, why? So it's difficult to explain to young children the impact of deaths like those leaders that have gone before. So you have to live it out. You have to rededicate your life to living a life through Christ. And that's the reason I've been active in my church as long as I can remember. And my mother and father and the folk on Center Hill in Atlanta always tried to live that example and set those goals for us of being respectful and recognizing that others have a life to live, and we can always step into the shoes of those, but we can always empathize, we can always think and give respect to our elders. So it's a profound effect that it had upon us, and it slowed the this bringing together of this great community that Martin Luther King preached about and tried to live.
Thank you for that, Mr. Light. Our next question will be, what was your reaction to the Bobby Kennedy and Lorraine Hansberry meeting? And just to remind everyone of this meeting, this is when Lorraine Hansberry and James Baldwin confronted Bobby Kennedy about escorting a Black girl with an army or an escort service to the first integrating school in her county, to basically show the people that if they spit on this little girl, they're spitting on the nation. And Bobby Kennedy refuses to do this. But Lorraine Hansberry brings him back to this image of Bloody Sunday, where this officer is standing on top of a Black woman's neck. I just wanted to know from you all, what did you think of that segment that was portrayed? I think I want to ask Mr. Dwayne about this one.
When I saw when she was going to school and she was surrounded like by a mob, it seemed, screaming at her. It was just still frames. They didn't. I don't remember seeing it showing a live clip of it, but just watching the still frames, and I remember focusing on her face, wondering what was she thinking at that moment, because she had to feel all alone. I mean, people within arm's length of her, screaming at her, spitting at her, saying God, probably everything that you can imagine to her. I couldn't believe she was not given any kind of protection. Forget nationally, even locally, I didn't see any protection for her. So it just goes to show that there is a segment then and there's a segment now of the population who do not want us to have a peaceful living space. You know, don't want to see you as Black Americans move forward or have equality. And there's always been that segment. And so that was a good snapshot of something like that. You know, it was hard to watch. You know, it was like, I couldn't imagine being in her shoes. I thought she showed great strength, but that had to be very difficult for a young lady of her age to go through that.
What do you think, Joshua, of this segment?
So, well, Dwayne, you put that into words very well. The still frame, it was a still frame. I don't remember seeing a video or anything moving of that, but just the original picture of the young kid, and obviously he was a teenager. You know, it wasn't like a 6 or 7 year old. It was a teenage male, and he did the the fingers behind the ears, which is always supposed to mean you're making fun of somebody. But it was just amazing to see. I guess I don't want to say like a kid doing it to a kid, because I don't think that's the point of it, or the importance of it. But for the effect to trickle down to a teen, and for them to understand Black people are nothing, Black people are worthless, you must understand this, and they're like, I understand this, I will go make fun of her. It was a shame to see. But as well as Lorraine Hansberry, when they were showing Bobby Kennedy in the meeting and they were showing her in the meeting, my respect for her just kept increasing and increasing and increasing, because it was amazing to see her, or to hear of her being so bold in a time like that, in a man's face, obviously the brother of the president, and to see the impact of what she was saying and everything that she did, as well as the exit, because when he stated it, he was saying that she said what she said and then she left. I was like, oh man, boss move. I just think it was great. It was empowering, and definitely have to do a lot more research on her. She was a big figure in her time as well. So, but I just thought that was very impressive, inspiring.
Yeah, just to add on, the meeting was very interesting to see how politics can in some way be involved in the community, and how they also see their political figures do the same thing to Black people. And I think that also relates to how the community thinks they can do the same as well. And I think when Lorraine Hansberry had that meeting with Bobby Kennedy, and I remember she said, at state of this civilization, I wonder what they would think of that policeman putting his knee on that Black woman's neck, almost in a sense where she was predicting and telling him, I don't think you want to make this move where you're not going to protect this Black girl to go to school, because if you fight violence with violence, it's never going to end well. And so I think she was a very powerful woman. I mean, she really showed it. She was not scared of him. It seemed as though she didn't really care who he was, honestly. But it just really showed how much she cared for her people and what a prominent figure she was. And it was really sad that she had to pass away so young. I think that was the sad part about this whole documentary, that these figures were so young and they passed away without leaving any, kind of mentees that could do the same thing. Miss Lee?
I started watching the movie today, and when I finished, the part that it stopped for me was, I didn't see the third part where King was involved, but I saw the part where Evers, I think, had just died. I think that was, Malcolm X had just died. But as far as what I've seen in the movie, it's a lot of what has happened today was because of some of our upbringing. Earth, Wind, and Fire had this song, The Way of the World. That's the way of the world. And it started off talking about a child is born with a heart of gold, and the way of the world makes him cold. And the way you all were talking about how the teenagers were taunting this Black girl, they didn't know any better because it was the way they were brought up. And still some of the things that you see happening today is the way people were brought up from back in the day. Every now and then you have one person who may decide to depart from the family values after they've been out there and they've seen a whole different side of minorities and so forth. And so they bring maybe a little dissension in the family because this is what the family has known and talked about all their lives. And then you got a daughter or son over here who says, well, I don't see it that way, or this is my friend, or whatever the case might be. I think that the three of those men had served their time, and it was time for somebody else to pick up the baton to go ahead and lead the nation. It was even with Kennedy, his thinking may have been, if I go there, by the time they kill me and they may kill her, what have I accomplished? because when King went out, he always had a plan. He always got everybody together and said, you know, this is what's going to take place. They're going to spit on you. They're going to throw rocks at you. They're going to put the dogs on you. They went through these drills and so forth where you would know how to deal with the physical that was going to be thrust upon you. You just can't go out there and start marching and say, yeah, we're going to be okay and be nonviolent. That's not how human nature is. So he had to get them ready and prepared. Kennedy wasn't ready. Kennedy wasn't prepared. He wouldn't even know what to say, because whatever he did, they were going to come after him. So unless he took a militia down there or something else down there, the same thing may have happened. I don't know if I could have been that girl. I really don't. That takes a whole lot to deal with when somebody's taunting you, spitting on you, and then you got to be reactionless, because regardless of what you do, you're going to be wrong, whether you react or whether you don't react. You know, my thing is, I'm glad that you all solved this. And with everything that's happening today, it's almost the same thing all over. The woman had, he had his neck on a woman, the officer had his knee on a woman's neck. And we got the same thing going on here in 2020 and 2021. Nothing has basically changed. A whole lot has changed for us, but there are other things that need to change. But, you know, we almost got to be like Michael Jackson. Everybody's got to take a look in the mirror. You know, you got to look at yourself sometimes and say, do I need to make a change, or do I stay out here with where I've been all along? And if I try to make this change and break away, what are people going to think about me? Or they may ostracize me also. And so you got a lot of things going on out here that you have to think about. There are a lot of things that you all as young adults are going to have to think about too, because you're going to be faced with this also. Some of it you've already seen already, and you sit up and say, oh, that happened back then. Well, now it's happening today. And so you have to make a decision about, well, how will I change this? Or how will my friends feel about this? I don't know. But even my daughter said, I saw and I heard you all talk about this, but I didn't think I'd ever live to actually see something like this happen in my lifetime, because I thought all this was over. And it's not. And it never will be over, because there are always going to be people out there who going to try to find a way to do the wrong thing. And I think a lot of these people know it's the wrong thing, but I'm in this group and I got to go along with the group. And so that's it. And so we don't want to change. It's as simple as that. You know, it's I don't know, it's a whole lot to deal with. That's all I got to say. And so I just hope that you all see what has always happened, and you all see that, because even after King died and things sort of died down, and we got equal rights and we got jobs and so forth, because I think my generation was the one that reaped the benefit of everything that Dr. King did with the civil rights movement and all these other folk who did with the movement and fought for rights and all of this kind of stuff. And then we look back and look at it and say, gee whiz, they still putting their knee on somebody's neck, and you still killing folk, and you still don't care, and you got cameras out there where you know that everybody's watching you. It's still a thing where we're still afraid for our children and our grandchildren, because we do not know. You can be innocently walking down the street, but because you look a certain way, dressed a certain way, got something in your hand, somebody can come after you and you haven't done a thing. Not one thing.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you so much. Kristen?
So just to remind everyone, in order to participate, there's a reaction that you can use to raise your hand, or you can type your name in the chat as well. We'll be moving on to the next question, which is, we're going to address the theme of simplicity and sincerity within American culture. And I just wanted to address this because I think this is a dangerous principle of apologetic words that were given to the oppressed, but continue to oppress those who are oppressed. So we have this issue of apologizing for actions and words that continue to be done in American culture. Elena, what do you think?
Well, you know, when you, for example, you just want somebody to apologize to you, that's all you want. And when what they say to you, it could be very offensive. The way they say it, like I was on social media the other day and we were talking about George Floyd, and we were talking about how he didn't deserve this, and there were all these people in the comments saying he was a criminal, he shouldn't have been, well, you know, all of that. And we were like, but the officers didn't have to do that. And then we're still in the same, well, we're still experiencing the same type of actions from people here than people, well, the same as people in this time and generation as the same as people in, you know, the 60s, 50s, 40s, going back then. And when they, you know, when they try so hard to be, when they try so hard to see our way, they end up not knowing they hurt us. They end up not knowing the way we feel because they simply haven't experienced it, which goes back to sincerity, because it's not that sincere when you think about it. It's just, it's not sincere because you're not really thinking about how the other person feels, which is.
And to add on to what Elena was saying, when you apologize, usually when you apologize, but you change your actions. And I think the problem we have in America is that we say, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize for this, but you don't take any action to change it. You keep it the same, and those words become meaningless. And James Baldwin also said that once that becomes a routine, it becomes an immaturity trait and not a sincere trait that you start to live in as a person. And I think that also goes back to the purity trait, where you're trying to apologize to preserve your purity, but you're not doing any action to erase that type of purity thinking into saying, I know I did something wrong, or my ancestors did something wrong, and now I'm going to change what they did, and not to necessarily take over, but become an ally in this issue. I think Mrs. Winfrey has been raising her hand for a while. Miss Win.
I first wanted to say, I think back with what you were doing, you made the statement of what has happened after Martin Luther King and those three. And I want to say I'm so proud of what you are doing as the young people. One thing about James Baldwin I wanted to say, he had gone to another country to escape all of this, but I was impressed that he came back. The next thing was, what are we doing? And I can remember teaching, being among one of the Black teachers to help integrate Grady High School and Sutton Middle School, and what the teachers had to go through during that time. And when we had our first Black history, a little young white student said that was a waste of time. And even got another comment about a Black student. But we as teachers had to try to teach the students, and I'm so impressed with you all and what you have. So somewhere along, the teachers have stood there and have taught and passed on that word. You know, we didn't, you may not be one standing out there, but there are a lot of people who took heed to what Martin Luther King, who marched in those marches, and what King and the others have done. And we're still carrying it on, but it's just taken a long time to get where we want it to be. But And like you, I'm so proud of your panelists and what you're doing. You're carrying on. So we are going to see that this happen. And I can remember going through, I think about the comments, the parents put you through, the students put you through. They all kind of lies that were put on you if they thought you were good to try to bring you down. I remember an instance that student said she was drunk in class. The principal tells another teacher to invite me to a party and to see was I alcoholic. They do everything. And the principal told me, don't give up, Miss Winfrey. A black assistant principal said, don't you give up. He said, because if you were white, they would say you were one of the best teachers in the city, teach. And but because of that, we've gone through a whole lot, but we have a lot to go, continue. So you're still going to be faced with a lot, but I'm so proud of you all. I'm so proud of you. Keep on going. We take it further.
Thank you, Ms. Winfrey. Josh, would you like to add on?
I would like to add on. You made a wonderful list of questions, but I think this was the one that, if we had enough time, everybody would speak on it, because it was a very, very, very clear question, as well as I believe the range of videos that were shown that James Baldwin showed, they were all pretty much the same. So I remember I wrote a lot about this, but my first sentence was, I think that all the tapes put together of the unapologetic or ingenuine sorries were indicative of how simple it is to apologize. I think even when you're young, like even when you're a kid, like you're taught to, if you do something wrong, apologize. That's how you make it right. It almost makes me think of like having a record scrubbed. And I forget who said reserving purity. I think that was Miss Lee, but it might have been Kristen, whichever. But reserving purity, I mean, to get your record scrubbed, just say like you had some petty crimes, all you have to do is, pay a fine or, serve the time or whatever. I feel like it relates directly to the word sorry, or, when we apologize. If you hit a kid when you were younger, you would, get in trouble, and then they put you face to face and you'd have to apologize. And then that would be it. And then all of a sudden you're just back to normal. I think it just relates so easily to how simple it is in America. And I'm not exactly sure if it's taught, in other cultures or in other parts of the world, but sorry is like the tape that fixes the chair, or the Band-Aid that you can put over a pipe that's busted. You'll do it 1,000 times, and you may not even mean it. It may be completely ingenuine. So, Kristen, I know you were the one that said you have to, say what you mean and mean what you say. So you have to follow up the words with actions. And Elena, I can relate it back to you because you spoke on earlier. I see your thumb, Ms. Lee. There you go. Elena, you spoke earlier about relationships. One of the things on social media for the congregation, just so you guys know, one of the things about social media is that relationships are talked about all of the time. People are obsessed with love. People are obsessed with partnership, all of that. And so one of the things that is always, repeated, like it could be a post every day, is when people say something and they don't back it up. A lot of the consequences are you have to cut them off, or you have to hold them accountable for their actions. And so the question was the theme of simplicity and sincerity within American culture. I mean, how sincere is sincerity, right? If all you have to do is apologize, and then you just continue to do the same thing, and then all you have to do is apologize again, you can continue to do the same thing, and so forth. How sincere is sincerity, right?
Good point. I was also going to add on to that as well. With the Ronald Reagan era, war on drugs, and Donald Trump now, and then mass incarceration with police brutality. So I think those are very prominent issues that we have today that people don't seem to understand, that there's a generational trauma and having fake, sincere apologies isn't going to help it. It's only going to divide our country even more. Our next question is, what were your opinions on the way Baldwin introduced cheap labor and mass incarceration to the productivity of American lives? Mr. Dwayne, would you like to answer this question?
Sure. When I saw that, it reminded me of actually the lyrics of a song I heard on YouTube when it said, you know, we don't have slavery anymore, but you know, they couldn't afford to just let slavery go. Then that was cheap labor. So we had to come up with another way to get that same cheap labor. And so now they changed the name from slavery and they just call you criminals. So that's the new slave trade, the criminal justice system. So we know how that actually works. So yeah, mass incarceration to me is the new slave trade. And we know how the injustices we see month after month. You know, they'll find some guy who is being let go 30 some odd years, something later, when they found out he really wasn't guilty of what they said it was done. And it's usually a black guy. And there have been countless examples of that. And there are more that's probably incarcerated now that will fall under that same. If everybody could afford a DNA test or have a Kim Kardashian to come to their aid, there'll probably be hundreds of more that will be uncovered. But yeah, the mass incarceration situation is the new slave, the modern day slave trade. That's how I feel about that.
Elena, what do you think about this?
Well, especially with the cheap labor, they're not really trying to help you. Especially with cheap labor. With cheap labor, you're not getting paid as much, or they're they're using the money for themselves, and it's kind of like where you go back to big corporate offices and jobs, where they're not doing anything good for the community. They're just trying, their morals are wealth and power. That's all they care about, wealth and power. And when you think about wealth and power, you don't think about anybody else but yourself, which not just spoils, but it rots the human brain. Especially with America today, we are moving into this new industry age where there aren't that many small businesses anymore, especially in this pandemic. There are small businesses and all these big corporate giants are coming in, selling stocks, especially before the stock market crashed. And I think that's a way, in a sense, it feels like the market and the economy, it's just going down because of these big giant jobs. And especially people are losing jobs. They're getting less, their income is going down. Then they got to pay more taxes and bills just to keep their house. And think that's something we need to work on, just to keep the American way, but not the American way, because even that is messed up.
I think to add on to that point, I think what James Baldwin said at the end, he said, we need to ask not we, but white Americans need to ask themselves this question, and it's, why do we need the Negro people here in America? And I think he went through this line of how or what type of final solution there can be to get rid of this free labor that we don't need anymore. And I think the solution was mass incarceration. And he also poses this principle in the pin drop speech that we're not these exotic animals that are savages that don't know how to behave or how to function in society. We're people. And this is not a race thing. This is a human thing. This is a human problem that we need to address. And if we don't, it's gonna be a bad thing. It's not gonna be this long drawn out type of like tension. It's gonna erupt. Miss Toki, You raised your hand for a long time.
Okay, oh boy. I study Black history now that I'm older and have the time. And I consider myself privileged. And the reason I consider myself privileged because I'm born in 1954. The first color TV was out in 1953. Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954, the same year I'm born. So just like Marilyn, I consider, I got the best of it. But I even got more than the best of it because my parents were in school with Dr. King. In fact, my father graduated with his sister, Christine Ferris. And mother would have graduated with Dr. King, but he went on to Morehouse. So I got blessed. Like, I have things that I wanted to say. For you guys, you saw color before you even got a chance to see what a black and white TV was. So the black and white TV for us was better than normal because a lot of blacks in the South didn't even have a TV. So if you got a chance to even watch black and white TV, it was limited to what the powers that be in the South, which allow you to see. Most people don't know that WSB stands for Welcome South Brother, where that Welcome South Brother is to not for blacks. And so when we think about what actually was going on, that was a reality that was going on in the North and a reality going on in the South, and they could be the same at sometimes, but then they were totally opposites at sometimes. That was another point that when Tina was talking and she said it was not in the books, I consider myself totally blessed because it wasn't in the books. But I had a 7th grade teacher, Eugene Thomas, who went to school with my parents. And he made us learn about the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment and the preamble to the Constitution and so forth. So you guys, if you haven't done that, you need to. The other thing is so much in my head that I wanted to address. That was when Marilyn talked about Dr. King's training. Well, there were some things that I didn't even know myself. And when I say that I didn't know myself, I considered myself learning a whole lot more than most people because my mother was in the union and the union was helping to plan things. And by her being in the union, I got a chance to meet Byron Rusted and A. Philip Randolph and some other folks I probably didn't even realize I was meeting. And they were members of helping to pull the struggle in. And my parents sat down and talked to us at the dinner table on a regular basis about what was going on, but not just what was going on here in America, but what was going on in Africa and how apartheid was very similar to what was going on in America. Just last year when we buried John Lewis, all my life I had been around the struggle, but I didn't really know this piece of the struggle. And the part that I didn't know was about Reverend Lawson, who is in Nashville, Tennessee, and how he had started to help. He started them to plan the picket lines and so forth over at Fisk University. And if I could go back in time, I would go over to Fisk University and take those Black history classes that I'm now struggling to learn more about. I'm trying to, it was so much, it's so much in my head. I'm going to leave you with this because I've been talking a long time. By watching, I had watched it last year, and I watched it again this year because I wanted, at first I was just going to be quiet. But Marilyn said, Toki, if you got something to say it. I'm so passionate about this. Because there was a 14th, 15th Amendment, you guys need to really, and that includes me, work to keep the 14th Amendment here, because that's where they're headed, to try to break the 14th Amendment. And if that's broken, it's going to be real, real ugly. There's a movie out, and I think it's on Netflix, called Amend, A-M-E-N-D, Amend. And it is hosted by Will Smith and a whole lot of other movie stars and so forth. People in the struggle, people that are a part of doing the lawsuits that have to go into place now. There are 7 episodes.
And so Toki, we'll put the amend thing. I saw that from you. I'll put a link to it in the chat. And I know you're really passionate. We have a commitment to 3:30.
I'm just want to just say, please take the time to look at Amend and compare it with this that you just saw. And that's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you, Toki. Kristen.
Now Pastor will close us out in prayer.
I just must say that you all are amazing. Someone put that on the chat. You young people are amazing. And I want to thank everybody for joining us in this. I have a friend, a theologian, who said there's much work to do. And if others, young people like you all, are out there working, it's going to get done. It's going to get done. So I want to thank you all so much. I hope you all everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. Let's end our time together with prayer. Let us pray. Holy God, now the work begins. May we go forth into the world in the knowledge that we are the hope for a new world, that the struggle for justice is the beat to which our hearts respond. And may we go forth in the knowledge that you go with us, that our justice is your justice, now and forever. Amen.
Before we dismiss, I want to say thank you to our panelists, Joshua, Elena, and Mr. Dwayne, and our moderators, Ms. Sherry and Pastor Shaw. And also thank you for everyone who showed up to this discussion and supported our youth. This means a lot to us, and so we want to say thank you. Have a good afternoon.